And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Andrew Bauer, who was clinically dead twice and had 2 near-death experiences. Andrew, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this.
Well, I appreciate you. And if you don't mind, Andrew, let's start with your first one and go from there.
So my first one was at age 7. There was actually a very severe virus that affected my old hometown in Massachusetts, along with the general area around where I lived. And I don't think they ever fully identified what the virus was, but it had the earmarks of something like a chronic fatigue syndrome or certain other viruses. It had a lot of different symptoms, but the main one, you started out with like a high fever, 101, 102, severe dehydration, severe lethargy, sleeping all the time, like 18, 20 hours a day, sort of things like that. And so by the time I got it, my brother also had it, but he had the mild version. So he was in and out of the hospital in 48 hours. But when I went in, they told my parents that it was the more severe version. And so I ended up in the hospital for most of almost a month total. Um, and within a few days of me going in, my fever had spiked all the way to 107, which basically your brain is boiling inside your skull. And I it got to the point where I was becoming septic, which, if most people are familiar with septicemia or septic shock, basically it started attacking my internal organs. And by the time I got to day 10 or day 6, I was in a coma. Day 10 total, and then the fourth day of the coma, it had already shut down. It started with my stomach digestive system. It shut down the liver, shut down the pancreas. Basically, it got down to the point where the only things left were my brain, my heart, and my lungs. And it attacked all of those on day 4 of the coma and shut them down. So basically, they called the code blue team in. I coded and was dead for 6.5 minutes total, from what they told my parents later on. And when they started doing, like, I remember them, like, amp of epi, and uh, charging to 250, charging to 300. I could hear that part, but it was like, for me, I was in a dark place. There's nothing. It's just all I could hear was voices, and I couldn't sense or see anything. And about the second amp of epi that they gave me, I found myself up in the corner of the room that I was in, and was looking down at what was happening. I could see, like, there was a doctor on either side of my head, and then 2 nurses down by the middle of my body. And so they had taken my uh, gown off and were shocking me, and basically, laid me straight out. I remember I was, like, just lying flat on the bed, but I looked at what I felt like was my body, and I didn't recognize it at first, because I was like, who is that in the bed? It can't be me, because I'm in my body. I have to, where I'm, like, who is that in the bed? And it took a while to realize, like, I could see my grandmother, who had spent most of the time with me, was out. They had shuffled her out in the hall, so she was watching through the window and the door, and I could hear her, like, worrying, like, is he going to survive? Is he going to live through this? Please let him live through this. And I thought it was weird that I could hear her, um, but as I was up in the corner of the room, I was wondering, like, what's happening? Where am I? What's this place I'm in? And a voice, I hear this voice in my head that said, you've passed over to the other side. but don't worry, you're okay. There's nothing to worry about. You'll be fine. And I couldn't see anybody at the time, and so I wondered where the voice was coming from. And the voice just said, we have things that you need to see. Please come with us. And at that point, they basically took me up through the corner of the room, where the ceiling and the walls met. And then I was drifting out over my old hometown. I could see like the roads that I was familiar with, like where my street was. I could see our house. Like it felt like it was up like maybe I don't know 1,000, 2,000 feet. I mean, but I could see everything. It was amazing. It was like flying in an airplane without the airplane. um, but all of a sudden, everything just went dark again. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up or coming to or whatever, and I was laying down in what felt like a room, but the walls, the ceiling, the floor, everything was made of this energy it was like this bluish green color, and it seemed like it was alive. Like I could reach out and touch the wall that was next to me on my right side, and there was like a barrier separating my hand from the wall. Um, like it was like it was it felt malleable, like you could move it, and you could push it, and you could see the wall kind of vibrate a little bit. And I saw this is when I saw the three beings that were around me, and the same voice that I'd heard in my head back in my hospital room spoke to me again, and they said, now you're on the other side, you're with us, you're okay, we'll be, we're your guides, and we'll be with you no matter what happens. And the the being that spoke to me was the voice was very sing-songy, if that makes sense. It was beautiful. I mean, it's more like a bass baritone, like higher than mine, but not by a whole lot. But it was very melodic, very almost like a singing voice. And I never heard anything like it. And I could see forms, but it wasn't like here on Earth where you see a body and you realize that this is a separate person. These beings were like um blobs of energy. They weren't didn't have a specific shape, and it kept shifting as I looked at it. And all of them were glowing the same color as the room, like this bluish green color, but it was very bright in the center. So it was if you can imagine like a power station, like energy, like right in the center was really bright, and it just radiated throughout the entire form that they took. And the other two beings, I got the very strong sense that both of them were human, but they very much deferred to the one that spoke. And I got the sense from the voice and things that he knew that he was not human at all. And that was very freaky to me at the time, because obviously I never met another being from any other planets besides ours. I wasn't even sure if there was any. I mean, being 7 years old, I didn't know a lot about the universe back then. But um, this being basically told me, that this is the other side. You're clinically you're dead on Earth, but that's just your body. You yourself are not dead. You're still alive. And that didn't make any sense to me. I said, and I was thinking like, that doesn't make any sense. And he said, don't worry, we will explain that. And he just kept answering me in my head. And I said, how is that possible? How do you know what I'm thinking? And he said, on this side, everything is done telepathically. We speak telepathically, which means with our minds to our minds. And we're able to move around and create things simply by thinking about it. We don't have to do things like you do on Earth. And so I tried it out, and it was interesting talking to them telepathically. Like, I'm so used to vocalizing my words and waiting to stop, and then the other person speaks, and but it was like a chorus conversation where all of us could talk simultaneously to each other, but all of us could understand what we were saying. We there was no overlap. It was like um, it's like being like you having like four channels of a conversation. You're able to pick and choose every single one you want to listen to, just by thinking about it. And anyway, they said you're going to have to. There's an experience you have to go through. It's called a life review, and I found out later that this is a very common theme for most near-death experiences. And I had no idea what that was. And they said basically, what's going to happen, you'll be able to see what you've said and done in this life so far. And so that sounds cool, is it like a movie? And they said, not quite. And they led me down this long hallway, and on either side of the hallway were these doors that slid up, and each one was like an individual pod chamber, if you want to call it that. It was like a recessed room that was down slightly from the level we were walking on, and each one had a pod that was about maybe 7, maybe 8 feet long. And the idea was he would get into this pod to slide down, relax, and the pod would slide closed over you. And they basically told me, look, this is an experience you have to go through alone. It's a very private experience. We can't go through it with you, but we will be nearby. We'll be here when you're ready. And when, it's something you just have to go through alone. And I thought, okay, it was not a problem. But then it started, and there wasn't much to my first one. I mean, 7 years isn't a lot of time, and I didn't really see anything of particular note, except one thing I remember was when I was, I think, 5 or 6. I took a Matchbox car from my cousin. I stole it, and didn't know that it was his favorite thing in the world. Like, it was something he and his father had shared. It was a old style Corvette. No, not a Corvette. I'm sorry, a Mustang, like a Stingray, a Mustang Stingray or something like that. Excuse me. And I took the car thinking, okay, it's really cool. I wanted to have it, but I didn't realize that it was something that he cherished. So I just thought it was something cool to have. But then what changed was I was seeing the the aftermath from his perspective, which was very different. I was not used to that, where I could feel what he felt. I could, the panic. Mom, where's my car? I can't find my car. Help me find my car. Where's my car? And looking all over for it and can't find it. And him crying, um, and I could feel every bit of it. And it was the most powerful emotion I'd ever felt at that time. And I never knew that that was something we could do, be able to feel what someone else felt. And it made me understand like why he cherished this car so much. And like I felt so bad having taken it from him. In fact, after I came back, I actually went over to his house, and I gave it back to him. I told my mom what had happened, and she didn't believe me, but I showed her the car, and I told her I need to go give this back to my cousin. His name was Vern, and he was so happy when he got it back. He didn't blame me or anything. Didn't hold a grudge. Didn't Wasn't angry. He was just so happy to have his car back, and it made me feel good to give it back to him. So that was something that really stuck with me. It's something that comes into play more later on. But anyway, so after the life review was over with, beings came and got me again. And what I realized was that the one that kept speaking was my main guide, and the other two were interchangeable. They were both beings that had been human recently, but they were, I don't know if the word is studying, or they were working with my main guide, but they always deferred to him. They didn't speak, they didn't give guidance, they just learned from him. And so the next thing, the my guide told me that you can go look around for a while if you would like, to see what this place is like. He said it's a very beautiful place. You're welcome to go look at it. And at that point, um, I had a kind of a fleeting thought of some mountains, and the next thing I knew, I was in this field of wildflowers that I'd never seen before, at least not in this life. And it was on this really steep mountain that like the field was very very steep, like a 60 or 70-degree angle, and there was like a deep valley below me on my left. There was another line of mountains across the way, and then the two lines of mountains converged in the distance, and there was this mountain with a slanted top on it in about, I don't know, 3-4 miles away. And it was very different from the other mountains went straight, like straight tip. This one had an angle to it, so I thought, it's kind of different, so it kind of stuck in my mind. um but the flowers, every color had its own frequency, its own sound. Um, and so, like, the combination of the yellow, the white, the pink, the purple, the red, all the different colors created like a chorus that filled the air and kind of permeated through me. It was the most beautiful, peaceful feeling that I'd ever had in my life. And still to this day, I can think back to when I was there. And like anytime I'm feeling stressed out or anxious, I can go back to that, and it calms me down almost immediately. And so this place, I laid in this field for what felt like forever. I didn't want to ever leave it, but I closed my eyes and I looked up, and I remember there was like it started to turn from like a sunset view to nighttime, and the stars weren't like we see them here, where like little points of light in the sky, where they all look like they're the same distance away from us. It looked like they were alive, like they were in 3 dimensions, and you could almost reach out and touch them. It's like the sky was malleable, and they were different distances, and it looked like it was in 3D, and it was alive. And I'd never seen the sky like this, and there was this energy coursing through everything, that it was this pinkish white energy. It looked like soft lightning. It's the only way I can describe it. And it connected everything to everything else. And it just ebbed and flowed. And every time it touched like flowers or a mountain or whatever the case might be, it would, briefly flash brighter. And then, that flash would spread out among the other like tendrils of this energy that were everywhere else. So it was gaining energy from everything, but also giving energy. So it was like an ebb and flow. And as I was looking out into the night sky, all of a sudden I was out there. I was outside of Earth. I could turn around, and I was looking down at the Earth, like almost like the visual behind me, where I could see like the Terminator with day and night, and all the different land and the oceans, and it was like this big blue, green, and brown glowing ball, and it was lit up with this energy I'd never seen before. And at that time, I'd never seen the Earth from outside yet. So for me, it was a life changing experience because I remember like reading later, like Apollo, it was Apollo 17. One of the astronauts, when they came back, they took a picture of the Earth from orbit, and they said it was for them. It was a changing experience because they finally saw the Earth as it was meant to be, just one place, not individual countries. There was no lines. There was no politics, no religion, no separation. It was all one place, and it was all ours. And well, not not like ours, like just human beings, but it was we were meant to share this place, and it was just it was amazing for me to see it, and I got to explore like parts of the solar system. Saw I remember that for me, my favorite one was Saturn because the big ring around it. I thought that was the coolest thing. I'd never seen Saturn before. I'd never seen any of the planets except I think I saw a picture of Mars once and a picture of Venus once, but I'd never seen any of the other planets. And to see Saturn with this giant ring around it and all these dozens of little moons kind of in and around it, it was like the only thing I can use to describe it is like being Superman. You can fly in and out of the rings and skim above the clouds of the planet and come back out and then fly on to the next one. And so like for me, Saturn was my favorite, but I also love Jupiter. But just being able to explore around, it created kind of an obsession with space that to me it's still with me now at 53. um, but this whole experience felt like it lasted at least 6 months, maybe a year. Like what we experience this time here is not how time passes there. Um, like, I was only dead for 6.5 minutes here, but it felt like I was gone for a year. When I came back, it took me a full month to like get used to time moving linearly like it does here. Like I wasn't used to, being able to just jump around from place to place again. And so it took me a while to acclimate back. Um, but after what seemed like most of a year, exploring between the Earth and the solar system, I felt my grandmother. I felt her, like her voice in my head, worrying about me, thinking about me. Is he going to make it? And it drew me back, even from as far away as I was. And I was way out in the solar system by that point, and it drew me all the way back, and I was instantly by her side, outside the hospital room, and I could see the worry etched in her face, and her hands were like clenching, like almost like fists, like trying to grab onto me almost, with her fist, and I could see through the window what she was seeing, like doctors and nurses working on me, and all I heard was clear, and I was back up in the corner of the room again where I'd started, and the same voice came to me again and said, You have to go back to your life again." And I said, "Well, can't I stay here? It's so beautiful here. Can't I stay?" And he said, "No, you have things you need to do and people you need to help, and there are reasons you have to go back. And unfortunately, you cannot stay, but you can carry this memory with you when you go back." And I said, "At least that, at least there's that." But as soon as he said you can go back, I was in my body again, and but it felt so alien to me. It was, it felt small and constricting. Like I felt like I was this huge, enormous being, and like my body was this little tiny box I was trying to put myself back into, and it wouldn't fit, and everything hurt. Um, I could briefly blink my eyes, and the light was so blinding and painful that I wanted to just close my eyes and go back where I was. And so I just it was just a lot of pain and feeling like I was cramped. And then I was back in my body, but um, I only regained consciousness for what the doctor said was a few seconds, and I went back into the coma again. And I was in a coma again for another 10 days before I was able to finally come out. And about a week after that, they finally released me to go home. But all told, I was in the hospital for almost a month. And um, like I kept telling everybody about my experiences, but like my parents thought it was just my imagination. Um, my friends thought I was a kook, thought I was making it up. The only person who ever believed me from the get go was my grandmother. And I found out why later. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But she was amazing. She believed me automatically, and then the one thing that really solidified it for me that it was a real experience was, remember that mountain I told you about with the slanted top. Well, I drew the scene that I remember seeing on a piece of paper, and when she saw that mountain, she said, "That looks familiar." And she went and got her copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was at the time that's what our resources were. We didn't have the internet. This was 1978, so the encyclopedia was all we had. But she remembered something from Europe that looked familiar, and so she kept flipping through the pages that were on Europe. And eventually, she saw this picture of a mountain, and she came and she showed it to me. I said, "That's my mountain. That's my mountain." And it was the Matterhorn in Switzerland. And I'd never seen it in this lifetime. I'd never seen Switzerland or any part of Europe before. So, to but I found out later that this field that I was in was where I'd spent a lifetime several hundred years ago, where I lived in that very field. And so for me, that field felt like home. And to this day, it still feels like home more than anywhere I've ever lived. But yeah, so that was my first experience.
Andrew, thank you for sharing your experience with us. Did you ever verify with the doctors and the nurses that you saw them, like you saw two doctors and two nurses working on you?
Yes. Yeah, I actually told my grandmother, and then she verified it right off the bat because she was obviously watching it from outside. But then when I told the doctor when he came back in, I said I saw, like, I remember one of the doctors had a bald spot on top of his head, and I'd never seen it. Like excuse me, the other doctor was the one who had been treating me, but this other one was consulting. And so I never actually seen him other than during my near death experience. But I described him. He had these horn rimmed glasses. He had this bald spot on his head. He had a birthmark in the shape of a tree on the side of his neck. So, like, I remember very specific details about this guy that I had never actually seen while I was awake. So, like, they brought him in, uh, and or I'm sorry, I got one of the nurses first. I told her about it, and she said, "Oh, that's I can't remember. It's Doctor Long, I think his name was." She said, "That looks like Doctor Long. Let me go get him and see if it looks familiar." And so he came in, and as soon as I saw the glasses and I saw the birthmark on the side of his neck, so that's him. I said, "Bend down," and he had that bald spot on his head. I said, "Yep, that's him." So, like, I'd seen it from the corner of the room, and she thought that was the coolest thing. Like, he didn't believe me. He thought I was making it up. And, "Oh, you just saw me passing by in the hallway." Nope. But the nurse thought it was really neat, and I think she believed my story.
When you were walking down the hallway to go to a room to have your life review, where were you? Do you think you were in a building or a spaceship or what?
Neither one. It was more like it was this space that could be. I call it, like, if you've ever seen the Harry Potter movies, I call it the room of requirement. where it's able to create whatever space and whatever necessities the beings in it need. So, like if they need a pod for a life review, it creates a pod for the person to lie down in and a private room for them to experience it in. If they need a place to acclimate to being on the other side, it creates that. So it's fully malleable, and it's not like a solid place. And like I said, I call it the room of requirement because every part of it is able to be shaped or made with whatever the beings need at that particular moment. So it wasn't like a building like we're used to it. It wasn't a spaceship. It just felt like this area, like like connected to everything else, but separate. Where you could have private, private rooms, private experiences without being around other beings.
Where do you think the guide was from who was not human during your experience?
That actually, I didn't know at the time. I also didn't. Didn't really. I mean, I knew he wasn't human, but at the time I didn't know a lot of details. I found out more during my second one. But I actually went to his planet during my second near-death experience, and he it was it was on the other side of the galaxy, literally. I mean, about as far away from us as you can possibly get, and still be in the Milky Way. And the way his solar system, like he and his species were from another planet somewhere else, and their star had gone supernova. So that, they had to they knew this was coming, so they had to leave to save their species. And while they were searching for somewhere else to go, he said they were led by you know uh, basically they have like very spiritual beings that were their leaders, and these spiritual beings are very in tune with the universe to a degree that no one else in their species is. And they got a very strong pull to go in a certain direction. And when they followed those directions, they ended up in this particular solar system that had, uh, well, it's something we call a Dyson sphere. I don't know what they call it. But Dyson sphere is basically it's a construct that normally it's a theoretical thing that scientists have come up with, where you could put it around a dying star and use it to um, basically milk the energy of a dying star to use for a civilization, to give it all the energy it needs. Except this one was not around just the star. It was around the star and all four of the inner planets, which were like the innermost one was not habitable, but the other three were in what they call the Goldilocks zone, which is the ideal zone where you can support life. And so their species found this Dyson sphere and these planets, with their old buildings that were looked like they were millions, even billions of years old, and he said they dated the structures that were left behind by whatever this species was that built this sphere and built these civilizations, and they they dated it to somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 billion years before they got there. So it had been around for a long, long time, and but it was still like the sphere itself was still active. Basically they created it solid to protect from like asteroids or comets or other things that might bombard the planets where the species lived. But it also could, on the inside, it was like a giant solar panel where it could collect all the energy from the star, and it could be used by any of the planets within it. So basically their species settled these three not the innermost, but the other three that were habitable. And over like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 million years, they eventually evolved over, to fit the planet that they were on. Like, for instance, the planet that he was from, it was about 5 to 6 times the size of Earth, but it was a very, very low gravity field. So um, they evolved to be much taller and thinner than we are, like 9 or 10 feet tall. Whereas, like one of the other species that had a very strong gravity field and was much smaller, their species evolved to be shorter than originally they were about our height or maybe a little bit taller, but they eventually evolved separately based on the environment and the planet that they were on. And so his planet was more arboreal. It was not developed, like any structures were built into the trees. Um, the only thing I could think of that's close to it, like if you've ever seen the Avatar movie, the original Avatar movie, where they all lived in this one giant tree, and was um, everything evolved around the connections between the trees, and so they were very arboreal in nature, where they developed very strong upper arms and upper legs to like swing from tree to tree, um, or run down limbs, things like that. So they were very strong, but they were like the only thing I think of is like maybe an orangutan, where very, very thin, but also very strong for their size. But they were very they had the center part of their body was um, translucent, like you could almost see through it, and their heads were really decent, really big size. They didn't have much in the way of necks, but their head was pretty good size. But they were, like I said, they were very tall and very thin, and uh, just they're the most graceful looking beings I'd ever seen in my life when I finally saw one. Um, but yeah, I went to this planet during my second near death experience, and that's amazing. Let me tell you.
Well, let's fast forward to your second experience.
Okay, so this one for me, this is the one I'm most excited about because the first one was my first experience and it was unique at the time. The second one had so much more involved with it. Um, it happened because of a severe brain injury. I was actually bullied a lot during the years in between the first and second near death experiences, and for a couple of years after the second one. Um, it's actually why my family ended up moving when I was 16 to North Carolina to get us away from that. But I received like 15 brain injuries in a 9-year period, and three of them were skull fractures, and two of those three were to the back of my head, including this one where um, I was at a camp a couple hours away from home, and I didn't know, but one of the main bullies that had been bothering me for a few years happened to be at the same camp. And when he saw me, he came charging at me, knocked me back over the bed I was supposed to sleep in, and then came around the bed, grabbed me by the neck and shoulder, pulled me up, punched me in the face several times, and then threw me back full force towards the wall. And where we were staying was like a barn that had been converted over to a cabin. And so, like, the first floor was offices, second floor was where the staff stayed, and then the third floor, or the loft, is where we stayed. And on the top of the loft was this A-frame roof, and it was supported by these 4 by 4 inch wood beams, and each one was set like in a flat orientation where, like, the top was supporting the roof, the side was supporting the roof, and then the inside and bottom were sticking out, created like a corner in the room. And so when he knocked me back, one of these beams happened to be about the same level as my head, and the corner of that beam caught me full force at the base of my brainstem. And as I found out later, the brainstem controls a lot of the basic functions of your body, your breathing, heart, things of that nature. So when I impacted that beam, basically I was out right off the bat. I was dead on arrival, basically. Um, I crumpled to the floor like a sack of potatoes, from what the kids told me later, and it shut off my heart and my lungs instantly. So I wasn't breathing, brain wasn't working, heart wasn't working, nothing was working. So the kid who did it got scared. He ran away, but the other kids started screaming for help. And so all the counselors started running from the next floor down. And one of them, thankfully, had training with CPR, which I later got because of him, because he saved my life. And he started performing the chest compressions, the breathing, and all that for 3 or 4 minutes. And they had already called the ambulance. It basically took the ambulance 4 minutes to get to us, but then they had to bring this stretcher up 3 flights of stairs to get to where I was at, strap me down to it, and then somehow get it down the other 3 flights back to the ambulance. So by the time they did all that, at least 5.5 minutes had passed by, and the guy who started doing the CPR, they didn't want him to stop, so I was watching him perform this CPR, and he uh, just compressing my chest with one hand, like this, the whole way down while they were bringing the stretcher to the ambulance. And when they got to the ambulance, they had 2 paramedics in the back, and then the driver up front, and the 2 guys in the back worked on me while the other guy drove to the hospital, which was a couple minutes away. Thankfully, very close. Um, but I was kind of like standing in the back of the ambulance. I thought it was kind of interesting that I could stand in a moving ambulance and not like get knocked all over the place, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I've been out of my body before in the first near death experience, so I kind of had a feeling of what was going on. And anyway, the paramedics in the back were working on me. They kept doing CPR. They put a breathing mask on my face, um, and they uh, they hooked me up to like a heart monitor, and uh, started like an IV line. And so they tried to do a lot of things all at one time. But eventually, what happened? They finally resuscitated me, or at least got my heart rate started in the ambulance about maybe a minute away from the hospital. And so by the time they got me into the ER, it was just they had to um, they just had to hook me up to a couple of machines and uh, check my heart rate and make sure the sinus rhythm was correct. And they saw that I was I don't remember the word he used, AFib. So I'm not sure. I can't remember what that exactly means, but I remember him saying AFib. And so they brought me back, but I'd been gone for at least 7.5 minutes. 7.5 is the minimum I was gone. And what I found out later was 7 minutes is kind of the dividing line where you start to lose um, brain function, and there's the possibility of either long term or permanent brain damage once you cross that 7 minute line. Uh, and I've had a lot of issues with my brain since then. Now, they're not all due to that one incident. They're due to a combination of all of them, but that did definitely contribute to it. But the second one, even though I was dead for 7.5 minutes here, the one thing that really stuck with me, that freaked me out, was on the other side. I was gone for a decade, and I'm not exaggerating one bit. If it was longer than that, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was at least a decade that I was over on the other side, because what I saw, what I experienced, the places I went, the beings that I met, the stuff that I was shown. There is no way that it took less than a decade for me to see it. There's no way. So that in itself is amazing because I mean, like I said, the first one it felt like a year maybe. This one felt like a lifetime almost. And I woke up in the same kind of malleable room that I'd woken up in before, the what I call the acclimation room, where you get acclimated to being dead and on the other side. And the same voice that I heard the first time was there again, and I saw the same being. And the one thing I realized is that every being on the other side has a unique energy signature. That's how we recognize each other. It's not like you don't see a body, you don't see a face like this. You see all it is an energy based being, but each one has a unique signature that no other being has. So that's how we recognize each other. So I recognized him right away as the main guide that I'd seen my first time around. But the two beings with him were both had a human energy signature to them, but neither one of them spoke. Just like the first time, it was like uh, almost like he was a teacher and they were his students. Um, and so they were just there to observe. They weren't there to contribute. And so the same being told me that I acclimated right away this time around because I'd already been through it once. And so he brought me straight to the near death. Not sorry, to the life review. And I saw more this time, and I'd done more bad things this time around. By the time I got to 14, I was, in that period where you're trying to impress your friends and do stupid stuff and be an idiot, and uh, so I had more to experience from the other perspective this time around. But by this time, I'd also experienced a lot of the bullying that uh, in the first experience, I was told directly that all this stuff was going to be coming. So that's the one part I forgot to mention is that I was told directly, you will experience many, um, you will experience a lot of violence, you experience a lot of head injuries. There will be residual issues from that later in your life. And come to find out that I have CTE now, and it was diagnosed in 2017, and it's because of those uh, 15 brain injuries. Plus, I also had one in 2017, which is when I was diagnosed, and then another one last year in 2024. So it's a total of 17, which is a lot for somebody who's never played football or boxed. So anyway, he like I said, I'd experienced most of the bullying by that point. It stopped when I was 16 when we moved, and I wanted to know why. Like it didn't make sense to me that we would be sent to Earth to experience pain and suffering. And so I remember asking in my head, like, why do I have to keep being hurt? Why do I have to suffer like this? And my guide came up beside me, and he said, I can show you why if you really want to know. But he said, it will not be a pleasant experience for you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we can show you and you can re-experience the life of you from a different lifetime. That will explain why you're going through this now. But he said, will not be a pleasant experience once you go through it. And we cannot stop it once you start it. So he said, if you choose to see this, we will show it to you, but it will be by your choice only. And I was curious, and I thought I'd seen the worst of what a life review could throw at you. So I said, I really want to see it. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. I want to see it. So they put me back in the life review pod, and as soon as it closed up, immediately I it started up with a different life review, but they showed me three of them. The first one was the lifetime I experienced in Switzerland, that where I knew the Matterhorn from, and That one was I found the reason they showed me the three of them was to show me three different types of lifetimes based on choices. The first one, I followed my path exactly as I was supposed to. I was a farmer. I was also a healer. I'm like a natural healer, and so I spent my life, growing my own uh, herbs and minerals and things like that, and helping the people in the nearby communities to get healed. And so that like that lifetime, I was married. I had two children. We shared this beautiful little cabin house, like a log cabin type house in this field that I'd been now. I'd already been in my first near death experience, and it was a wonderful, beautiful life. It was perfect life. It couldn't imagine being any better. It's the one I always go back to when I want to imagine like a perfect life. And then they showed me the lifetime after that, and this is where everything changed for me. I was in the banking industry. At this time, I was living in America, in New York, and I had a job where I dealt with like stocks and securities and things like that. And what I was meant to do with that position was to help people get into new homes, help them gain financial security, help them come back from, financial struggles, things like that. So it's supposed to help people like I do now. And unfortunately, I chose to allow my greed and personal benefit to outweigh my desire to help people, and went completely against the reason that I was supposed to be there. And and so what I ended up doing was I harmed a lot of people, and I mean hundreds of people, whole families. I saw, and like I said, I was seeing that all these from their perspective. I saw, parents who had to get evicted from their homes because they couldn't afford the payments. Because I'd put them in these homes with these exorbitant payments they couldn't afford. Um, I had the people that defaulted on loans because they couldn't afford the interest rates on the loans, and ended up going to debtors prison because which was the thing back then. Um, and the worst one for me was seeing children that were out on the street with their families who were begging for money, begging for food, begging for anything someone could give them. And these, it was like if you remember the '80s with the Ethiopia ads when they were doing like, I think UNICEF or whoever was doing those ads where they showing these kids that were emaciated with the giant bellies, they couldn't even wave the flies away from their eyes. It was, the most disturbing thing you'd ever seen. And that's why it had such a huge impact. And seeing these kids out on the street, I mean, it broke me in ways that I can't even describe now. And I mean, I was in this pod screaming, please make it stop. Please, I don't want to see this anymore. Please make it stop. Please take this away from me. And I heard my guide's voice in my head. You chose this. You wanted to see this. This is what you chose. You can't stop it now. You have to go all the way through. And it was a very stern, like not in this normal voice. It was very stern, like brooking no argument kind of voice. Like, basically the voice I needed to hear at that time, where it's like a parent telling a child, you have to, you've made your bed, now you have to lie in it. And so like I said, just seeing the kids, I had destroyed so many families by having them evicted from their homes, kicked out on the street, uh, parents sent to debtor's prison, kids that were sent to live with relatives they never met or foster families they never heard of. Um, and what I was also doing at the same time, besides hurting them, I was embezzling money from the company that I worked for. And I was using that to buy all these elaborate, like we had a big home in the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And then we had an apartment in, what's it area called? The Village. Um, But anyway, so we had an apartment in the Village, really big, expensive apartment, really big, even bigger house in the Upper East Side. We went on multiple vacations every year. We were living way beyond the means that I should have had based on my job, and that's how I ended up getting caught. And so eventually, I was caught for embezzling. They went back and showed that I had over a decade um, of like false claims and fake loans and things that never should have been. I never should have created in the first place. And so they used that to charge me with a whole bunch of crimes, and they convicted me, and I was sent to prison. And unfortunately, or I don't know, I guess it depends on your point of view. While I was in prison, three people who were also there, whose families I had destroyed, knew I was there and found me in the laundry one day and stabbed me to death. So I was only in prison for maybe a couple of years before that happened. And what I got to see at the end was, um, at the time, if you were an indigent person, like you didn't have a home, you didn't have money, or you were a prisoner and died in prison, they buried all of them in the same place. It was a place called Potter's Field out on this island called Hart Island, which was in Long Island Sound, and basically grazed with no marker. It was like what we did with a lot of like Civil War dead, and Native Americans. Like we just buried them in unmarked graves, and I just to see how I went from what I could have been and what I was when I was embezzling money, all this, you know, beautiful home and apartment and elaborate vacations, to being buried in an unmarked grave on an island that nobody cared about, nobody and everybody forgot about. And it was like going from the 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 heights of society to the lowest possible point you could reach. And it just like my wife divorced me while I was in prison. My kids disowned me. I remember when it was announced I had died. Um, Several families who had managed to pull themselves back together financially through a party. Basically a ding dong, the witch is dead kind of party for celebrating my death. And I can't say, based on what I did to them, I can't say I blame them one bit. I mean, when I came out of that life review, they showed me one more. I had a brief life, like only lasted 17 years. It started in like 1900. I got the um, Spanish flu epidemic that hit most of the world back in 1918, 19. I got that and basically died at the age of 17. But then I'll explain why later. Um, but when I came out of that pod, the only thing I could see was those children's faces in my, like, stuck in my head, one after another, after another, after another. And I couldn't even though I was just an energy being, I felt like I was drained. of everything. I just fell to the floor and just laid there, and I felt what felt like forever. Um, and I remember I described this once to a couple of people, and I said, if there had actually been a hell, a real hell, I would have thrown myself into it at that particular point. I was at the lowest point a person could possibly reach, and like I said, I was broken in every way a person could be broken, and it changed everything for me, um, in more ways than one. And because I even at that time in my life, in this life, I was living more for myself. I was selfish and, you know, wanting to impress people who didn't matter and still don't. Um, just living for myself, and it it felt like such a waste of a life. And to do that on the scale that I did in that lifetime, where I hurt people that, by the hundreds, where, because like I said, every time I close my eyes now, like if I remember that life review, all I can see is face after face after face. And if I ever need motivation to do different, to do better in this life, that's all I got to think about. So, but after I came back from that life review, like I said, I just laid there. I couldn't move, and uh, the my guide and the other two beings kind of left me alone for a little bit because they felt like I just needed to process what I'd seen and what I'd experienced. And when I finally called out to him, and he and the others came in, they kind of helped me get up. And I said, "What? Is why did I need to see this? What what was that?" And they said, "You. This is what happens when you stray from your path. When you choose, because all of us have free will. Every being in the universe has free will. And when you choose to stray from the path of helping others to hurting others, to harming them, this is what happens. And because of that lifetime, you chose to create the one that you're currently in, where you're experiencing pain and suffering because you wanted to understand how you had made those people feel. And you also wanted to create a lifetime where you would come back and help others, um, to make a better life, and where it wasn't about you this time around, but it was about them. And so that's why this entire lifetime that you're living now became necessary, because it was to make up for, you had to live what they call a life of atonement. And that was a word I remember specifically him saying. And I said, "What does that mean exactly?" He said, "There's a difference between making up for something. Like just saying you're sorry isn't enough. To atone for something means I understand that I did wrong. I understand what I did to you, and I want to truly, you know, I want to truly make the world and your world better, um, for my being in it. Like you want to help others, in a way where it's completely about them and not about you." And that's when he pointed out that life in between, the short one in between that one and this one. And he said, "You chose wrongly in that life, because there's different ways of going about making up for a harmful life. One of them is that, where you just choose to end, to suffer for a short time and then die young." But he said that's still all about you. It's not about anyone else. And he said that doesn't help anyone. It just helps you. it makes you feel better for a little while. And then he brought me outside this area where the pods were, and he showed me this area that was off to the side, and there were beings in there who were very dark. Like they looked like they were out of focus, but also just very dark. Like their energy level was really low. And he said that's the other way to do it, is to do what they're doing right over there. And he said what they have chosen is to experience something like hell in this realm. The only thing that comes close to it in this realm is to separate yourself from all other beings, from the light that all of us, the light and the love that all of us experience on a daily basis here. They choose to cut themselves off from that. But once again, that is all about them. It's not about anyone else. That the life that you picked in between and the existence that those beings over there chose, both of those ways are short-sighted. They're all about you, and they don't help anything. So the only thing that can help is to truly atone for what you've done, and that means not only to suffer so that you understand the suffering that you caused, but to make a life where you deliberately help others, not expecting reward, not expecting anything to come from it, but merely because you can and they need it. And he said that's what this life you're living now is about. And he said finally, after, because he said you almost chose the way that those beings are choosing right now. You already chose that one life that did nothing. So he said, finally, on the third time, you chose correctly. And so um, that right there stuck with me more than anything. Like since I've been back from that near death experience, that has really driven this whole life more than anything else. Like every time I think about that life review, every time I think about the faces that I saw, what he said about what helps others versus helps us only, and so that completely changed. I mean, this life was already going to be different anyway, but that in itself changed it even more. Where I was no longer living for me. I was no longer doing things for me. I was doing things entirely for other people, and so it completely changed my entire life since then. But after that life review, I felt like I was still drained of energy, and he sent me back to the field in Switzerland where I'd been the first time around. And for me, that's like a place I can go and recharge. Um, it's very much, like I said, it's like home for me. And so I spent some time there, probably felt like months worth of time, because I felt so low, so drained, so cut off inside from, like, I still couldn't feel the love that was all around, and I knew it was there. I could sense it, but I couldn't feel it because um that's how much this life review affected me. It took away my ability to feel love for a time where I had to regain that, had to train myself to feel it again. And eventually I went out into space again, and I think that's kind of where I regained the love that I was missing. Because when, like, I didn't stop at Earth this time around. I didn't stop at our solar system. I went way beyond. I started exploring our entire galaxy, and I could just pop from one place to another. Like, you just, I would just think about a place, and I was there. Pictures I'd seen in books, or you know, whatever the case might be. Anything I remember seeing, I went there to look at it in real life, and to see these places. up close and personal was easily the most amazing experience of my life. And it made me feel connected to the universe in a way that I'd never felt before. And that's when I started to feel the love, because I could feel the love in everything, like how everything was connected to each other, how I was connected to all of it. And I knew that there was something behind this. Like a lot of people describe God or, some type of um, eternal being. And now I call this being God, like most people do. But for me, the experience of God was different. Um, it wasn't the God of the Bible. It wasn't the God of any book. It wasn't the God of that human beings describe. It was this overwhelming energy of love. And it was the most pure form of love that I'd ever experienced in my life, where it was completely about wanting the very best for every single being and every single atom in the universe. Like for God, it's like the whole universe, every little tiny particle in the universe is that important to him or to God. God doesn't just see, beings or planets or stars. God sees everything and is in everything. And the way we label God in this world, where it's he or she, or old or young, or loving or mean or vindictive or needs our money. We try to put God in a box. And what I realized right off the bat was that God doesn't fit in any box. Um, it's um, it's it's like I said, it's just overwhelming love. Is to put God in a box. It's like trying to capture a rainbow in a bottle. You just can't do it. And I could feel God in everything that I saw. Like everywhere I looked, I felt this overwhelming love being radiated from everything that I looked at, everything that I saw, everything that I experienced. And it was in the smallest things and the biggest things. And so, like, I explored our galaxy, and I remember seeing so many other planets. And it was the first time I'd seen planets outside of our solar system. And I didn't see, most of the time I didn't see any of the beings who lived there. I just kind of saw from outside in space, and you could see evidence of lights and metal structures. There's evidence of civilizations, so you could see there was something there. But there's only two times that I remember I ran into a being of a that wasn't human. The first time I saw this ship that was it wasn't sharp edged like like something we might build. It was very smooth and rounded in every aspect, and it was about the size of. I mean, you imagine the biggest moons in the solar system, like Titan or Ganymede. It was like that size. It was huge, and the reason why it was so huge is because it contained their entire civilization in this one ship. Um, Basically, like the one like I described earlier with my guide's original planet, where their star went supernova. This being or this civilization, their civilization had been wiped out by um, X-rays, like from the formation of a black hole. I think it's when a black hole forms, these giant X-rays shoot out of the north and south poles of it and go at at light speed in whatever direction they happen to be facing. And anything caught in the path of these bursts basically gets wiped out. There's nothing left of it. and it just strips the atmosphere off of whatever planets it encounters. It strips off any protection that they have. So like the solar winds and their stars will just basically turn them into a brisket. There's nothing left. But that's what happened to their species. And I remember that there's a couple of beings near one of the windows, and they were looking right at me. And I was outside the ship, and I thought it was strange. And I moved to one side, and their heads turned towards me. I moved the other way; they turned again towards me again. I thought that's weird. They can see me, and they one of them smiled at me and thought to me. I realized they could communicate telepathically, like my guide could, and like everybody could on the other side. And said, "Yes, we can see you, but it's all right. We're very in tune with all of the universe. We can see things that others cannot." And these beings were very short statured, but very muscular. And like by focusing on them, I could see like their whole history, um, like the whole history of their species, how they came to be where they were at that particular point. And their planet that they came from was like 10 times our gravity. So they were only like 3 or 3.5 feet tall, but they were very muscular, almost like you would imagine um, uh, one of those like in Lord of the Rings, like Gimli, like a really muscular dwarf. Um, but they were the most kindly beings I'd ever met, which for me it seemed like a weird dichotomy. Like I if I saw a being that looked like they did, and I had to describe what I thought that being might be like, personality wise, I would describe very angry, um, uh, violent being. But they were the complete opposite of that. They were the most loving, kind beings I'd ever encountered at that point in my life. And I thought, well, if all humans were even a tenth as nice as these two beings right here, we'd be in a lot better shape as a planet than we are now. And eventually, I moved on, and I felt drawn in a certain direction, and so I followed that pull, and I ran across that Dyson sphere I described earlier, and I was able to pass right through it like it wasn't there, of course. And on the inside, I remember I could see one planet off to my right, the one that my guide was from. And I got the sense that there were three others, but I couldn't see them directly from where I was. And in the distance was this huge red giant star. And what I could see when I looked around was a lot of these little ships, like maybe 2 or 3 person ships that were just flitting all over inside the sphere. Basically, they were uh, doing maintenance on it and just checking to make sure everything was in working order. And one of those ships happened to be nearby me, and the two beings inside were outside in suits, doing work on the sphere. And as soon as they sensed me coming, they turned around and looked right at me. And now, so this is like the second species that saw me when I was dead. And I thought it was really strange that other beings could see me, um, and they could hear me in their heads the same way I could hear them. They were telepathic also. And the one thing, there was a male being and then there was a female being. And like I said, they were like 9 or 10 feet tall, very thin, very graceful. Their arms just seemed to like sweep. Every motion was just sweeping. It was not there wasn't that jabbing motion like we would do. It was very melodical, and it was very beautiful to watch, almost like a dance. And The male being answered me when I thought it was strange that other beings could see me when I was dead. And they said more advanced cultures are not very far away from being from what it's like on the other side. We're able to see and experience things that you cannot in your limited vision. You know, the body that you're inhabiting on your planet is very limiting. You're not able to see, hear, or experience things that other beings can. And so, uh, but we sat there and talked for what felt like forever. They were the most wonderful beings to speak to. Um, I felt immediately drawn to both of them. Eventually, the female of the two moved off and was continuing her work, but the male being continued to talk to me and was telling me about their culture, how they developed on this other planet, have been drawn to where they were now, how they populated the three planets. Each one had developed along its own evolutionary path based on the gravity and the environment of the planet that they were on. He said that his culture was very simple. He compared it to our Native Americans prior to the European invasion, where they were very much in tune with the environment. They used everything, wasted nothing. Were very symbiotic, had a symbiotic relationship with their environment. And he said that colored everything that they did and thought, where they they wouldn't they wouldn't even consider hurting or killing another being, even the smallest of even the smallest form of life. They cherish life in all of its forms, and especially plant life, because for them, trees and plants were their whole world. They built their world around that, and so they he described the way that their culture worked. He said, you know, like I asked him, you know, he kept saying my parent this and my parent that, and it's a stranger like, oh, you don't have a mom and a dad like me, and he said, no, we reproduce a, and I just learned what that meant in biology in an early biology class, and you know that like they don't procreate like we do, they um, they just automatically develop an offspring inside them, and then that offspring eventually comes out. Their gestation period is much short. It's like half of what ours is. It's only like 4 or 5 months, and they also have a very long lifespan. Like he said, that like the average lifespan for them was 400 years. So a very long-lived culture. Um, and he described the way he said his parent was very conservative, was the word he used, much um, like like an old fogey in our culture, like very stuck in his ways. Didn't want anything to change. And what had happened is over the millions of years that they'd been on this planet, eventually they'd given up space travel entirely. But the younger generations, with each successive generation, they started to ask questions about, like where did they come from, how did they get there. They found some of the ships that had been basically mothballed off in a you know uh, side storage area, and wanted to restart them and go exploring again. And so for a while, it was a kind of a culture clash between the older generations and the younger ones, as far as wanting to let them go explore versus not. And he said his father was very much in the not category. He felt like all their beings should stay on the planet, like they were very much tied to the environment there, and to leave that would make them lesser. So he wanted to go off and explore. He felt he'd always been like me in that way, where he was always looking out at the stars, always looking further out and wanting to explore it. And but his father didn't want to let him. So one night he left with two of his friends, and they took one of these little ships that I'd seen them in. In fact, the female that was with him was one of those two friends that he left with, and they took off. And when his father found out, he sent other beings that were going off into space a message to give to him. Basically, if this is what you choose, don't ever come back home. I denounce you. I rid myself of you, so to speak. And he felt very guilty about that at first. So he kind of stayed closer to home. He joined the crews that were maintaining the sphere, so he could be closer to home. And he kind of checked in on his parent on a regular basis to see how he was doing. But one time when he was away, when he was getting ready to leave on a science ship to go explore further out into space, his father experienced a very bad fall. Normally they were very agile and were able to jump from tree to tree and branch to branch without any problem, but he lost his grip and fell several hundred feet and died. And because of the way they left things, my guide felt very guilty, felt very torn. He wanted to explore, but he felt like he couldn't leave his father. And so he grieved over the loss of his father for a long time, even though they his culture and the other cultures knew what death was really about. He knew his father was not really gone, but it was because of the way that they had left things between them. He felt like they had left things unsaid and undone, and so he felt an extreme amount of guilt. And their culture, unlike ours, they're not uh, like they don't have a stigma about taking your own life. For them, it's how your life ends and when it ends is entirely up to you. You can wait until it happens naturally, but if being chooses to leave their life early for whatever reason, there everyone respects that and honors that, and they actually they have a center that you can go to where they will actually help you transition over to the other side. And so he went there and he was describing this whole scene, and I thought it was strange. Like, I thought, well, maybe he changed his mind because he's still talking to me at this whole time. And then he said, I took my own life. And right as he said that, the whole scene started to shift and change. It went dark. And then when I could see again, I was back on Earth or back in this other realm, and I was in the room with the pod, the life review pod. And unlike before, where the my guide and the other two beings were just these amorphous energy blobs, I saw him the way that he had been in his life in that previous lifetime. And I remembered because it was like a eureka moment for me, because I thought, how did I not recognize this? Like, I recognized that sing-songy voice, the same voice that I'd heard twice before in my near-death experiences, and I heard from this being out in space. Like, how did I not recognize my friend? And immediately, like, we had this very strong bond, like beyond the whole guide thing. It was like I call him my space brother, because he's like a brother to me. And as soon as I recognized him, I embraced him, and like I was back in like my what we call this a residual self image, the way the vision you have of yourself from your previous lifetime. So when you take on that guise, whether it's like like people report seeing dead relatives that look like a younger, healthier version of the relative that they knew. It's a residual self-image because you can choose to take on any form that you want. And so, as soon as I recognized him, we immediately, we embraced and, hugged, and we started just jabbering at each other for felt like the longest time. And like, how did I not see you? How did I not recognize you? And that's when he told me the story that, when he had taken his own life, in our world, was hundreds of years ago. So he'd been long dead, long before I, started this lifetime. And when he went to the other side, he felt lost for a while. Like he reconnected with the being who had been his father, and they reconciled. But he felt lost after that. Like he didn't know what direction to go. He didn't know what to do next. Do I go back? Do I go somewhere else? Do I stay here for a while? And he felt this intense need to explore. It's something that he'd gotten in his previous life, but he realized it had been part of him for much longer than that. And when he mentioned it, I felt the same thing. And it's something that's been with me my whole life. This need to reach out, go farther, explore, go places that nobody's ever been. I've always had this pull to for the longest time I wanted to be a travel photographer. I wanted to go to these remote areas of the world like Iceland and Afghanistan and you know and parts of Italy and the Alps and go exploring with a camera and just take pictures of everything and then write about my experiences. And that's what I wanted to do with my life for a long time. But this need to explore is not limited to one planet or one place. Um, like for both of us, we kept talking about it over and over again. And he said that's why I felt drawn to you and why I became your guide, because I felt in you the same need to explore that I have. And so you said we're very simpatico. I don't know if you know what that word means. We're very in sync with each other. So, um, but yeah, so he then pulled me aside and he said, "There's another being that you already know, but you don't realize you know, uh, who has been around much longer than I have, much longer than either of us have been around. And this being wants to explore also, but she has been around since the beginning. She was one of the very first, among one of the very first physical cultures that ever existed in the universe. So had been around for, like 12 or 13 billion years, and one of the oldest beings around, basically. And he said she wants both of us to join her and explore places that others have never been. And there's only one being who's been to the places we want to go, and that's the being who created them. And he showed me the basically the plan was to um, like go beyond the limits of the universe that we know of. Even and they know where the limits are. Um, like the universe basically recycles. And this is one thing I learned during that near death experience. One of the many things I learned actually is that there's no beginning, middle, and end for anything. Uh, Once you realize that everything in the universe, down to the smallest particle and to the largest star, everything is made of energy, including us. And if you've ever taken physics, one of the first things you learn about is the first law of thermodynamics, which basically says energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it can only change form. And that explains how we're able to transition from this world to the next, why our our energy-based form survives death, because the body is just a suit we put on. We put it on. We come into this universe to exist in it, to manipulate it, and to experience it. But once we leave this universe and return to the one we came from, the energy-based realm, we have no need of this body anymore. So we take it off, just like we would a scuba suit or a space suit, and we return to breathable atmosphere. And so basically, it's how the best to put it. Losing my train of thought. Yeah, I'm going to pause for a second. Think the best way to put it. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Uh, okay, so the beings on the other side, they know how far the universe goes, but the universe doesn't end like we think it will. It's already been through uh, multiple existences, if you want to call it that, or like there's the Big Bang is basically the beginning. It's where all, when everything's so compacted, it just explodes out at the speed of light. Everything goes in every direction, and eventually, the one thing we're starting to discover now with quantum physics and quantum mechanics is that there's such things as dark energy and dark matter that make up the current estimates are about 95% of the entire universe, all the mass in the universe. And so one of them tries to expand, the other one tries to contract. And so they're in that constant back and forth battle. Right now, the expansion energy is the one that's ruling the day, so to speak. And that's why the universe is still expanding. But eventually, they will reach an equilibrium. And then the contraction, I think it's the dark matter that wants to contract, pull back. Well, that will eventually take over, and everything will come back together in the same place that it spawned from. And when everything reaches that same level of pressure and heat and everything like it did at the very beginning, it blasts out again. So it's a constant cycle of birth, life, and death, just like for us. Everything in the universe has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the end is just the next beginning. And that's one thing a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize until he showed me this, is that the universe never ends. Because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. Even if you believe that we are eternal, that we never die. If the universe were to end, what would happen to us? I mean, where will we go if there's no universe? So the only way it makes sense is if the universe is also eternal and continue and goes through the cycle over and over and over again. So we've already had several iterations of the universe before this one, and there'll be more after this one. So what we can think of, like the 15 or 13.8 billion years that this universe has been around, that's just half one iteration. There's so much more to it, and so, but there is something beyond where this universe goes, and the the only being who's ever seen that, like the beyond all of the matter in the universe, all the mass in the universe, the only being who's ever seen that is God, the one who created it. So that's what this third being that he was describing, he and I want to go explore, not in this lifetime, not in a physical lifetime, but once I leave this world and my work here is done, then we'll move on, the three of us together. And I found out that this other being had been in my life for most of it, and I never realized it was my grandmother.
Hmm. Wow.
So this being had taken on the guise of my grandmother because she was trying to evaluate me to see if I was the type of being that she should bring along with her on this journey. And she had gotten the recommendation from my guide before she ever decided to evaluate me. But that's why she believed me when I told her about my near death experiences, because, in maybe not a fully conscious way, but partially unconscious, she knew I was telling the truth because she had been there. She had been there multiple times. She's had millions of lifetimes already. And since she's been around for most of the age of this universe, so 13 billion years that she's been around. And so for me, that's exciting. To and my grandmother passed away back in 2015, and I did not realize that it was her until just like maybe a year ago, when my guide was talking to me about this whole idea, because he brought it up during my near death experience, but it was more of a tangential thing. It wasn't like, it wasn't a fully fleshed out idea yet. But now that he and she are on the same realm, um, they're able to communicate directly. And so she's already filled him in on what her plan is. And I can tell you he's excited because he won't stop talking about it. Every time I talk to him, that's all he wants to talk about.
Well, how often
Um,
do you talk to him about it, or in
oh
general?
God, maybe 3 or 4 times a month. I mean, I talk. I mean, sometimes it's just a couple minutes here and there, but other times we have like I more hear him. But I mean, I know he can hear me, but we don't. It's hard to have a conversation per se. It's more like he just says something, and then I will answer that. I know he hears me, and so then he'll answer something, and I'll. So it's not like a regular conversation like you and I are having, but I he can hear what I'm saying. I can hear what he's thinking back to me.
How did you finally come back to life and to your body?
Well, after exploring around, and he brought me back to that room. Um, he had to show me some other stuff too. For instance, like the one thing that I have to do before we can go on this journey, so to speak, is there's stuff coming for us, for humans, um, that is currently in the works. Like right now, what all these people that are coming back from near death experiences, there are more coming back now than ever before for a reason. We're laying the groundwork, the foundation for what's coming. And he told me that things have to get worse, way worse, before they get better, because there are too many beings on this planet right now that are still like I was 2 lifetimes ago. Very self-centered, very into themselves, wanting, all about greed and power and position, and don't understand that we're all connected to each other.
So,
And he said basically what has going to happen has they have to experience it for themselves.
so basically, he showed you the future.
Correct. Yeah, not only our future, like me and him, but the future of where humanity's going. Basically, we're due to evolve as a species. That's why there's so many people who have reported seeing beings of other types, other from other parts of the universe, because we're being watched, and there are beings standing by basically to help us evolve from outside, but they do it in a way where it doesn't interfere with our growth. Like if you can imagine a being that you can't see or hear or speak to, but is on a level that they're in a plane of existence we can't see. Because we have very limited sight and hearing and everything with a human body. So, but from that realm that they're in, that plane of existence that they're in, they can influence events here. And so what they're doing is they're shaping things where eventually the people who are causing the problems right now will eventually be made to feel and experience what they're doing to other people. Like it's like a life review, but while you're living. And once enough beings here go through that, eventually the um, things will tip in the right direction where we will start to realize that we are connected to each other, we're connected to everything in the universe, and that we should act accordingly. In other words, we act right now as individual beings. We act from our own self-interest. We don't act to preserve the environment or the planet that we live on, even though it's the only place we have. We don't act to help others on a majority basis because we're so much into ourselves. And so we have to have enough people learn that that isn't the way we need to be before we can turn things around and start to evolve. Um, and they're basically standing by to help us once we realize that. Um, they can help us evolve towards the beings that we're meant to become, which are more like them, where we can uh, where life on Earth will be more like it is on the other side, not like where we can necessarily travel to parts of the universe in the blink of an eye per se, but where we live and exist in a constant state of connection versus individuality like we do now. And so that's where humanity's heading, and basically what we're doing. People who are returning from near-death experiences now, we're helping to dispel the fear of death. We're helping people to understand what the other side is really like, why it's so beautiful and amazing, why we should want to, create, make the earth more like that. And the more of us that come back, the more people eventually will hear us. I've spoken to dozens of groups, different from a dozen people up to several hundred. Now, I guarantee all those people probably didn't hear and process what I said, but some did. And those people would have spoken or said something to other people. And so every time we put this information out there, people hear it, people pass it on, other people hear that. And so it's like it's constantly getting more. There's more and more people that are going to understand and know these things as time passes. And so what we're doing, this whole process is going to take several hundred years to fix because it didn't get created overnight. It won't get fixed overnight, and it won't get fixed right away. Like I said, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It has to, because unfortunately there's too many people who still don't understand how things really are, and until they start to understand those things, they are going to be acting in a way that they do now, where it's all about them and their position and their power and money and things that don't matter. One thing I wish everybody would realize is, like, when you die, when you leave this earth, you don't take any of that with you. You don't take money, power, or position. The only thing you take is the love that you put into the world, the help, the people that you helped, the things that you did that made the world a better place. That's what you take with you. So if everyone realized that, they would probably act differently. So anyway, so that's where things are going eventually with us. And once I was shown that, which took a while for me to understand the whole intricacy of it, um, eventually I was brought back to the hospital room where I started, and I was up in the corner again, like I was in the hospital room in my first near-death experience, and I could see the doctor waving this capsule under my nose. It looked like some kind of like a weird capsule, but it was wrapped in looked like gauze, And it was the weirdest looking capsule. It wasn't like trying to make me take it. It was just something he was waving under my nose, and I found out later it's smelling salts is what it was, like something to basically wake you up. And so I was very close to being awake again, and that's when my guy told me, you'll see us again, but the next time you see us, it'll be, you'll be staying for a while. It was his words, basically I'll be coming back to stay. But that's when I woke up in my body, and like just like the first time, it was everything was bright and painful and constricting. But this time it took me way long because I was gone for what felt like a decade. And so when I came back, I couldn't speak for 4 months. Like I couldn't function. I couldn't process what I'd seen. Even to this day, I mean, I'm 53. It's been 39 years since that last one, and I'm still to this day processing stuff that I saw and experienced. I guess I just found out about my the being who was my grandmother, less than a year ago. Um, but what I came back with was the ability to see patterns, see how things fit together. Like some people come back with the ability to be like a medium or communicate with beings on the other side. I don't have that, other than my spirit guide directly. I can see my grandmother sometimes when she's around me because her energy is really strong. But mostly what I came back with was the ability to see how things fit together, um, what makes things tick. So like I was able to see like like for one of the things that questions I always had was how do people have so many different near death experiences? Like, why is there not just one experience? And I said, well, in my head I was thinking, well, Christians wouldn't accept a scientific experience. A scientist wouldn't accept a Christian experience. Christians wouldn't accept a Muslim experience. So there's got to be different experiences, but why? How do they do that? And that's when like the whole concept of it came to me, where near death experiences are malleable, fully immersive experiences where they are able to use the mindset of the person having them. And, because the beings on the other side have the ability to create anything. So they can create an experience that reads our mind basically and understands the mindset that we have, what we would believe, what we would accept, and creates the experience to fit us. So that's why there's so many different near death experiences, is because there's so many, there's as many different people as our experiences they can have. So, it's things like that I am able to understand that I couldn't before, where I'm able to see why things work the way they do.
Well, Andrew, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
I am very open to that.
What's the best way to reach you?
They can either contact me through my email, which is dukefan with DUKEFAN 1971 at AOL.com, or they can contact me through my name on Facebook Messenger, which is Andrew Bauer, Bauer.
All right. Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
I definitely can, because I've seen where things are going. For people who worry about, well, two things. If people who worry about their loved ones on the other side, don't. They're in the best place they can possibly imagine. Like picture the most amazing places you've ever been to, combine them all into one, multiply them by infinity, and you won't even be getting close. So that's number one. Number two, if you're worried about where humanity is going, the future that I saw, the future that we're working to create, I was told there is no way it will not happen. It's going to happen. The only question is when and how fast. So if you're worried about where things are going, where, like, because we a lot of times get bogged down in the now, like what's happening right this second. But the The history of humanity, the future of humanity happens over eons. What's happening right now is just a blip on the radar. So don't worry about where things are going. We will make it, and we will become so much better than we are now.
Andrew, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.